Okay, I think we are live. Welcome, everybody. This is Gretchen Wegner, and I am the creator of the anti-boring approach to powerful studying. And this is our final guest expert interview of the summer. I'm so excited. Yes, so excited to introduce Joe. Joe, I forgot to ask you how to pronounce your last name. I've been saying McCullough. Is that right?
That's close. McCullough, yeah.
McCullough. So, presenting Joseph McCullough here. And he is, as his little banner says, a physics professor and an author of the book Accelerated Learning for Students. And Joe, I am so thrilled that we got connected by Denise, I think like maybe a week before I launched the anti-boring program. It was just ideal timing.
It was good timing, yes.
Awesome. So in just a moment, I'm going to have you introduce yourself and tell us the short version of how it was that you became this expert in accelerated learning.
Okay.
And before we get there, I just want to name for all of our listeners that there should be a chat on the right-hand side of your screen. And so you can be asking questions via that chat. My assistant Megan is not with us today, so I will be keeping my eye on the chat, and if there are technical difficulties, I apologize in advance for them, but I won't be able to problem solve that, so you'll get to listen to the recording when it comes out afterwards. Thank God for recordings.
Yay, cross your fingers.
Yes. So, Joe, tell us, how did you come to do this work?
So I've been a physics teacher. This is going on my 14th year, and my first year teaching, I had students that were just having the worst test-taking anxiety. I had one student in particular that was one of the brightest students I ever taught, but he kept just flailing on quizzes and exams. I know he knew the material. He could talk to me in my office, but when it came time to take in the test, he literally just froze. And I wanted to help him, and one of the math instructors I knew was doing this amazing work with NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, where she was basically working with students and in the course of 2 hours helping them overcome test-taking anxiety that they've had for years. And so I got involved with NLP. I started studying it and kind of became a coach for a little while. Started my fascination with the brain, and then about 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, I had a 1-year sabbatical for teaching. Got involved with accelerated learning through a company called Quantum Learning Network, and I started doing their super camps and quantum learning for teachers, and basically that just skyrocketed me, and ever since then I've just been reading as much as I can read, helping my students, basically just loving it, just really getting involved with the brain, how people learn, and just trying to incorporate that into my classes and just helping students learn more effectively. And it's been just a ton of fun.
Awesome. Sorry, I also noticed I want to name to people that one of the technical difficulties we had is that Google Hangout for some reason is not automatically going back and forth, so I have to choose when it brings my picture and bring Joe's picture, and I'm going to try not to interrupt him with my face, but it might happen from time to time.
Okay.
And Joe, I know we're going to get into the nitty-gritty in a little bit.
Okay.
But I would love to know, like, is there just like either a story you can tell, or just one or two snippets you can give about how your teaching has changed before and after being exposed to NLP and quantum, well, the quantum learning stuff and the accelerated learning techniques?
One or two snippets.
I know.
Well, the first thing, I really have been trying to just make my classroom a joyful experience for students. So one thing I did was just environment speaks, everything speaks. And so 4 or 5 years ago, the classroom I was teaching at, phenomenal classroom in terms of technology, but the paint on the wall was old. There were just file cabinets that were not in use. And so I got permission to repaint the classroom. I brought in plants, I had students bring in posters, I used music in the classroom, and the classroom now you come in and it's just bright and it's colorful, and I have loud music playing, and I just want it to be a joyful experience. And so as soon as my students walk in, it's an inviting atmosphere. There's motivational posters. I have yes posters. I have plants. It's just a really inviting atmosphere. So as soon as you come in, it doesn't feel like a physics classroom. It feels more like someplace you want to be. And for me, I walk in there and I automatically just feel better. So I spend a lot of time thinking about the environment. I'm also very conscious that students need multiple modalities in terms of learning. So I'm always thinking about, visual information, auditory, kinesthetic, getting as many different learning styles into every single lesson that I incorporate. I also teach in chunks, so it's hard for us to pay attention for more than maybe 15, 20 minutes, and even that's pushing it. So I'm constantly thinking about breaking my lessons up into small 15-minute chunks, followed by some sort of interactive review. Some kind of review where students are talking it over. And I use clicker systems that if I had time I could do a whole webinar on, but they're just a great way of getting students to interact with each other and reviewing the material by talking it out. So those are you.
You just made me think that one of the things that we talk about in the anti-boring approach to powerful studying is how students can become their own teachers.
Yes.
And so, and one of our comments from Kelly said that she should do that with her office. She's the adult learner who we're going to ask her question a little bit later.
Okay.
So I love the idea of her sort of making a more joyful office environment if she's going to be learning and working. I mean, hell, when we're working, we should have a joyful place to be.
This definitely applies to students too. Where you study, oftentimes a lot of people don't think it makes a big deal, but it can make a big deal. You want your study place to be someplace where you want to be. And we can talk about this more, but one of the mistakes I see people make is ideally you want your learning space just to be there for learning. So some people study on the kitchen table, they study on their bedroom. The problem is kitchen table has an association with eating. So if you're studying at the kitchen table, there's a good chance you're probably snacking while eating. Or your bed has an association with sleep. So if you're trying to study on the bed, there's a good chance that you're getting tired. So ideally, you want to have a learning space that's just for learning and really set it up so you feel good when you sit there to study. So like my desk, I've got motivational posters, I've got plants, I've got little post-it notes with sayings, things that just remind me of what's important to me, someplace I want to be. So taking the time to really personalize your learning space and make it someplace that you can sit down for a couple hours and feel good about being there.
I love that. And you're also reminding me of some research that I've read about the different kind of focus that is required in our brain when we're surrounded by nature versus when we are surrounded by buildings and angular environments. And the brain, there was a study about kids taking a break by walking through a city environment, and kids, these are college students, taking a break by walking in the woods. And the woods allowed them to take an actual brain break to soften their focus. And this study recommended that even photographs of plants, if you can't have a real plant, actually help you be able to soften your focus more in a brain-friendly way.
Right, and even fake plants. So I used to have real plants in my classroom, but over the weekend or over the summer, the plants would often not last because I forget to come in and water them. So now I have nice fake plants that, even though they're fake, it just still adds that nice natural touch to it. And you can get pretty cheap plants from the Goodwill and from garage sales because they're really expensive. You can pay several $100s. So at the beginning of every school year, I go out to the Goodwill, I find some nice plants in the office in my classroom.
I'm remembering, I think you made this point in your book too, didn't you?
I did.
Great. Now, one more thing about what you just said before we dive into you defining what accelerated learning is the idea of chunking that you mentioned, and then and making sure every 15 or 20 minutes that your students are actually stepping back to notice and reflect on what they've just learned in the previous chunk. And It occurred to me that for students, it could be a really great idea to have a timer, and I love fun timers, so I have my little tomato timer here, but there are even more fun ones than that. And set it for 15 or 20 minutes, and when it goes off, you force yourself to stand up and go to a whiteboard or stand up and move somewhere and just write maybe even just for a minute or draw a picture or do something to summarize what you just learned in the last 15 minutes.
Right. And we'll probably touch on this later, but it's an important memory technique too. You can actually learn more by breaking your study session up into chunks, because we tend to remember the most at the beginning and the end of any learning session. So you can create more beginning and endings by, let's say, breaking up a 2-hour study session into 4 half-hour blocks, something like that. So now I have 4 beginnings and endings, and I'm going to tend to remember much more than if I just crank through 2 solid hours without any kind of break.
Great. So those of you who are with us, if you would like to, as Joe starts telling us about accelerated learning, if you would like to also let me know a little bit about your own learning context. I have a feeling we have a number of adult learners with us today. And I know we have one mother of some middle school age students. But if you guys can just chime in on the chat, then I'll let Joe know that when he's done, so that we can make sure we're tailoring what he's talking about to your needs and experiences. So, okay, what is this thing called accelerated learning, man?
So accelerated learning is one of these phrases that now tends to mean many different things. I basically think about it as learning efficiently and quickly, knowing what we know about the brain. So accelerated learning in my mind is, given what we know about how people learn, how they process information, and how they recall information, how can we use that to help students learn efficiently? Because a lot of students don't have efficient learning strategies, and the reason is they've never been taught it. So schools are not really teaching many of them the skills necessary to master any subject. And so accelerated learning techniques is, how do we learn faster? How do we remember more of what we learn? How can I apply this in my everyday life? So real quick, it started in the 1980s. A Bulgarian scientist named Dr. Georgy Lazanov was basically looking at how people could learn language faster. And he started looking at using music, the environment, how chairs are set up, temperature, lighting, natural elements, really just sort of breaking down the environment and looking at what are the specific environmental pieces that help people learn faster. And using his techniques, which he called suggestopedia, people were able to learn a language 3 to 10 times faster. And ever since then, I mean, there's tons of people with accelerated learning products, but they all have the same thing in mind. How do people learn? How can I use that to help people learn faster?
Awesome. Awesome. And so now, speaking of the brain, and tell us a little bit about what you understand about how the brain learns. And I want to just say to those of you who've walked through the anti-boring approach to powerful studying that Joe presents some information that I don't present. The brain is so complex, it would take a long time to really understand how it learns. So I want you guys to listen up closely, because I just love the way Joe breaks it down.
So I want to try doing a screen share, and I want to just give you a quick little 5-minute hit on accelerated learning, which you need to know about the brain. So let's see if this works. I'm going to share the screen. Share. Okay, can you see the screen?
I sure can. It says learning and memory formation.
Excellent. So we take in information all the time through our 5 senses, but generally, there's only 3 senses that we usually associate with learning. We've got visual, all the information we receive through our eyes; auditory, everything that we hear; and kinesthetic, what we're doing with our body, our tactile senses. All of that information enters our senses and then comes to a part of the brain called the thalamus. The thalamus takes that information and basically classifies it and sends it to different parts of the brain. It actually sends it in 2 different parts at the same time. First, called the high road, basically goes to the sensory cortices, and we'll talk about that in a second. Second one, called the low road, leads to a place called the amygdala, and that's our emotional control center. So the thalamus takes all of our visual information, everything we see, and it sends it to the part of the brain called the visual cortex. So if you were to touch the back of your head, that's where your visual cortex would be, right below your hand. All of the auditory information sends to a part of the brain called the auditory cortex. If you put your hands right over your ears, that's about where your auditory cortex is. And then all the kinesthetic information gets sent to the part of the brain called the somatosensory cortex. All of these cortices then process the information and sends it to the part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, which is where our working memory is stored. Two important things about working memory. One is it can only focus on one thing at a time. So I'll talk about this later, but multitasking does not exist. If you really want to learn something, then you have to focus on that thing and not try and text or watch TV or anything like that. Second thing is when that information gets stored in our long-term memory, we used to think it was stored like a video, where it's basically taking a video of what was happening and that's how it's stored. But memory is so much more complicated than that. All the visual information actually gets stored in our visual cortex, auditory information in the auditory cortex, and then kinesthetic information in the somatosensory cortex. What this means is that if you use multiple senses while learning, that information is going to be stored in different parts of the brain, which means it's going to be easier to remember it at a later time. Now, this low road, it also sends it to the place called the amygdala. And the thing about the amygdala is it's our emotional control center. It's where our freeze, fight, or flight response kicks in. And the thing about the amygdala is anytime it feels fear, anxiety, stress, or threat, which you can remember with the acronym FAST, it basically kicks in your freeze, fight, or flight response. Blood drains from your prefrontal cortex, adrenaline courses through your body, and in essence, learning is literally impossible in this state. And this is why students get test-taking anxiety, is their amygdala kicks in for some reason because they're feeling anxious, and they literally cannot think clearly. So just a little one-page summary. We have visual, auditory, kinesthetic information coming from our senses, gets sent to our thalamus, goes into two different directions at the same time. First direction leads to the auditory, visual, and somatosensory cortex. Second direction leads to the amygdala. We want to keep our amygdala calm in a sense so that we have maximum access to all the information which is in our prefrontal cortex. That was a quick little, let me stop. That was a quick little, a little bit more than a 5-minute summary. But two important points. One, we store information in different parts of our brain. Visual information in the back of our head, auditory information in our auditory cortex, and then kinesthetic information in our somatosensory cortex.
Okay, so let's actually get kinesthetic with this for a second. So will you do that again? And I encourage everyone watching to do with your hands what Joe was just doing to make sure you get it registered in your body. So do that again.
So this is how I would teach it. So we have 3 different learning styles. The first is visual, everything that you see, auditory, things that you hear, and then kinesthetic, things that you do with your body. Visual information is stored in our visual cortex, which is located in the back of our head. Auditory information is stored in our auditory cortex, and then kinesthetic information is stored in our somatosensory cortex.
It's going to be a new hip dance, Joe. Wait, what was it? The top?
Visual, auditory, kinesthetic.
Exactly. The new hip. Everyone's going to be doing it in the club soon.
This is what I got this from quantum learning, and when I teach teachers, we do this, and I can't even say visual, auditory, and kinesthetic without doing it. I've done it so many times. It's so ingrained. And this is the great thing about memory is now, to me, this represents visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. That motion now is completely ingrained in my body. If I ever forgot something, I would just start doing it, and it just clicks in. So as a student, you want to think about using visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learning strategies. Second thing is with the amygdala, you want to keep that low. And so getting into the proper mental state before studying is huge, because if you're fearful, anxious, feeling stressed, or feeling threatened, you're not going to be able to learn. Literally, learning is impossible when your amygdala is active.
Awesome, and I'd love for those of you who are there, and by the way, we have the mom is there with both her students, both her kiddos, so welcome to Jordan and Kelsey as well.
Awesome.
And so I love it, we have the younger students and we have the older, and we have someone who is even older, and I'm just going to let you know her question right now. Is that she is curious about the aging process and if a lot of what you're talking about works not just for younger students but also for folks who are 50 plus, let's say.
The great thing about accelerated learning techniques is they work for anybody with a brain. So I'm pretty sure that applies to everybody who's watching this webinar. So yes, these techniques are universal. They apply to everybody. Now, let me just say that part of accelerated learning techniques is learning the specific learning styles that work best for you. So there's specific visual strategies that tend to work better for visual learners, but everybody would do better by incorporating some visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learning styles. And part of accelerated learning is learning how you learn best. And nobody can tell you that. It's basically a trial and error kind of process. You got to try certain techniques, see how they work, modify them, try them again, and eventually hone into your specific learning style, which is going to be different for everybody.
Great. And so I'd actually love, while before Joe moves on, I'd love it if those of you who are listening in can even just type into the chat a little reflection about anything that you're taking away just from this brain piece that we've talked about that you can apply to your own life. And we're going to keep on going here. We don't have a chance to pause, but feel free to multitask, even though you're not supposed to. And type while we continue. And those listening to the recording can pause the recording.
They can.
Yes. So, okay. Oops, hold on. We want to stay with me for just a second.
Okay.
Have we finished the brain piece, and are we ready to move into the 5 steps of your process for accelerated learning?
Yes, we are.
Great. Go for it.
Okay, so like I said, there's many different accelerated learning techniques. People teach it. Excuse me. I tried to modify it and make it as simple as possible for middle school, high school, college students. So my 5-step technique, gotta look at this. So you can remember it with the acronym PACER, P-A-C-E-R. P stands for prepare your state. So before you start learning, before you take any tests, before you sit down to study, one of the most important things is getting in the right mental, emotional, and physical states for learning. This is something that many students never really think about, but if anyone's an athlete, any athlete knows that before any match, before any event, first thing you do is you warm up your muscles so that they perform better and you don't pull a muscle. Many students don't ever think about warming up their brain, but getting in the right mental state before you sit down to study, literally that alone can double your learning. So there's different techniques you can use. I'm sure we'll have time to go through a little alpha state process that you can do to get on the right brainwave state. But other things that involve is believing you can do it before you actually sit down. If you sit down with a negative attitude, you're literally setting yourself up for failure. You want to make sure your learning environment is optimal. You want to have some goals before you sit down to study rather than just, I'm going to study for an hour. You want to say, okay, I'm going to do a specific number of math problems. I'm going to read a certain amount in the textbook, knowing before you sit down what you're going to accomplish. So 1, prepare your state. 2, then you want to acquire the skills and knowledge. So there's a few different things for this. 1, you want to start with the big picture. Learning a new subject is like putting together a puzzle. If you don't know the big picture of how everything fits together, it's like trying to do a puzzle without ever seeing what the puzzle's supposed to look like. Can you do it? Yes. Is it going to take a lot more time than it should? Yes. So if you can sit down and preview a chapter before your instructor teaches it, if you can get a big picture of how everything fits together, it's going to be so much easier for your brain to put the puzzle pieces together. And then also in terms of acquiring the skills and knowledge, it's learning using multiple modalities. So using different visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learning strategies, and also taking into account multiple intelligences. After that, the C, cement the learning. So once you've prepared your state, once you've taken in the information, then you want to use some memory techniques to make sure the information gets stored into your long-term memory. Because once you learn something, it's in a pliable state. It's basically in your short-term memory, your working memory. But if you don't do anything with it, your brain's going to delete it so it can make room for new information. So you need to make sure if you want to learn something that you're actually making an effort to make sure it gets stored in your long-term memory. After that, E is examine and embrace. Examine basically means testing yourself. Don't wait until you have a quiz or test and figure out how well you know the material. Once you've taken in the information, made an effort to store it in long-term memory, examine your knowledge. Do a quick test to see how well you know it. And then embrace basically means practice it. It's one thing to learn the material, but if you never actually put it to use in your own life, it's quickly going to be forgotten, because we just have so much information we're constantly being bombarded with. As you know, like even as a teacher, if I haven't taught a course in 3 or 4 or 5 years, I've got to review the material, and I've been teaching for 15 years. If you haven't looked at your notebook in weeks, you probably know that you've forgotten a lot of what you've learned. So embracing just means putting it into practice. And then last but not least...
But I have a quick question about this that I'm sure might be going through especially our younger learners' minds, and that is, I'm supposed to use it in my real life, but so much of what I learn at school, there's no way to use in my real life right now. So how would, if you're taking a history class, for example, or even in physics, how does a student actually do that?
That's a great question. So some of that is subject specific. Like if you are taking, let's say, history, you may not have an opportunity to use it in your everyday life. But in terms of practicing it, it does mean maybe you're having a conversation with somebody about what you learned a couple of weeks ago, or you're reviewing old material. It's anything like if you're learning a new sport, you have to constantly practice in order to get good. Same thing is true of learning a new subject. So rather than taking a history test and then not doing anything until the next history test, you want to ideally every couple days be doing a little bit of history so that over the course of time you start to develop this history muscle in a sense. And so ideally if you can do it in your everyday life, that's the ideal situation. But even if you can't, you can still practice by using the material in a classroom setting, talking with other students, reviewing your old notebooks, doing additional problems, things like that.
Great. And, Peg just chimed in. I think we're responding to her question right now about how does she cement the information, and she said repetition or decide that I want to. And I just want to throw in a quick little story and ask if this is what you're talking about, Joe. Just today I had a client who's in her upper 20s, and she is learning to be a psychologist, and her class that she's taking this next semester is where they have to learn pretty much everything that's in the DSM manual about all the different psychological disorders there are. And I proposed to her that she's using this cool notebook system that I set up, that I teach all my clients how to set up, and I proposed to her that she do a fold-out piece of paper that's pretty long. And every time she learns about a different one, to figure out how to summarize it in just a few words and put it there and draw it in kind of a whatever way she wants to, and use color and maybe draw a little stick figure of someone who that represents that, and then collect all those pictures and then review the old ones when she adds new ones to it. And then it's kind of a puzzle that she gets to fill in for the semester, is how do I fill this whole long piece of paper with these little representations of the different disorders. Would that be an example of cementing the learning as you go?
That would. So I think of cementing the learning as making a deliberate, conscious effort to make sure the information gets transferred from short-term to long-term memory. Because a lot of times people will just, review their notebook and then that's it. But taking a few extra steps to make sure that everything you reviewed then gets transferred to long-term memory is going to increase it. And part of it is just letting your brain know it's important. Like literally, I almost think about my brain as a partner, and I'm like, all right, brain, I need to remember this information. I want to make sure you know it's important. And there's different ways of doing that. We have I have some cards on different memory techniques, not in terms of actual, well, maybe not techniques, but strategies. So I know there's not enough time to learn. There's different memory techniques like the PEG method, the loci method, but there's certain strategies that work for everyone. Things like using lots of color, reviewing frequently, studying in chunks. Things that no matter what you're learning, these different strategies will help make sure that it gets transferred from short-term to long-term memory.
Awesome.
And making a deliberate effort.
Great. So, sorry, keep on showing
my... Okay. So we have PACER.
Yes,
our last... Real quick, a little recap.
Right? We still need to do step 5?
Yes.
Great.
So yes, let me just recap. So P was prepare your state, getting in the right mental, emotional, and physical state. A was acquire the skills and knowledge, getting the big picture, using visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learning strategies. C, cement the learning, making a deliberate effort to make sure the information goes from short-term to long-term memory. E, examine and embrace, And then R is review, revise, and reward. Review means not reviewing what you learned, but reviewing how you learned. What were the study strategies you used? Were they effective? Were they not effective? Ideally, I would recommend keeping a learning log. So I'd say, you know, studying math, these are the techniques I learned. This is the result I got. Maybe this particular technique didn't work so well for math, so I need to try something out. And that's the revise part. So you want to review how you learned and then revise it over time. So ideally, over the course of months of trying this, you're going to figure out what is the best strategies for you, and it may be different in different subjects. How you study math may be different than how you study history, that may be different than how you study biology. So certain techniques may work good for you in one subject, but not another. So review and revise is all about honing your own personal strategy. And then the one that a lot of us forget, reward. Reward yourself at the end of a study session, after a quiz, after an exam. We want to anchor positivity to the learning process. And one of the things is that students just get into this wheel of constantly studying, taking a test, moving on to the next test, moving on to the next one, and never really just taking a few seconds to just enjoy your victory. Even if it's, you know, you didn't get an A, that's okay. You worked hard and you want to just reward yourself, because we want to make learning pleasurable.
Yeah, well, and I really want to underline, to underscore this idea of just a few seconds, because I know, like my coach who's coaching me right now in business development always asks, how are you going to reward yourself? And I'm like, oh, I hate that question. I don't know. But a reward can simply be just taking a step back, even just a couple of seconds, and saying out loud, man, I did it, or ah, oh, awesome job. Like, as simple as just giving yourself an affirmation. And then if you want to take yourself out for a milkshake, you can do that too. But that affirmation is, I think, what's the most important part of the reward as far as the brain's concerned. Is that correct?
It is. And you know, in my classroom, if the clickers, when I do these clicker questions, it's almost like a little student response system where I post a question on the overhead. Every student has a little remote control where they get to answer A, B, C, D, E, and we see how many people answered A, B, C, D, E, and so on. If students get, you know, more than 60 or 70% right, I'm always like, turn to your neighbor, give them a high five, and tell them you're awesome. Or give somebody a knuckle bump and say, good job. It doesn't need to be a huge reward, but even something as simple as giving somebody a high five, it just starts to anchor positivity to learning. It starts to associate pleasure with learning, and that's what we want.
Great. Great. Oh, I just looked at the time. I was thinking everyone should give themselves a high five for being halfway through. Yes, us. Awesome. So I want to make sure that we clip-clop through some of these questions because we have so much good stuff for people.
Okay.
But I would love for you now to share with us one way that students can get into that optimal brainwave state for learning, what you're calling the alpha state process. And I think you have an activity to lead us through, don't you?
Yeah. I've never led this on webcam. So let me do a little screen share first again, just to give you a little bit of background. Let's see how this works. Screen share, share. Let me go over here. Okay, can you see that brainwave slide?
No, not yet. Oh, yes, now we can.
Okay.
Cool.
So if you look at somebody as they're thinking, basically whenever you're thinking a thought, what it really is just electrical signals being sent between neurons. And using a device called an EEG, you can map out these brain waves. They call them brain waves, but they're really just brain signals being sent between neurons. And there's four main ones. There's beta, and this is sort of the brain wave we're in every day when we're just living out our day. There's alpha, and this is sort of the holy grail for learning that I'll get to. There's theta and delta, and these are both related with sleep and when we're unconscious. So when we're conscious, you're usually living in beta state, which is great for everyday living, but that's where our consciousness is constantly bouncing from one thing to another. Like I said, there's no such thing as multitasking. What's happening is your focus is quickly switching from one thing to another, which is great for things like driving or parenting, where your focus constantly has to shift. But if you want your brain to be focused on one thing and one thing only, which you want to do when you're studying or taking a test, you want to make a deliberate effort to get into the alpha brainwave state. And so there's a process, there's a process called the alpha state process. I first learned this from quantum learning, and I modified it for my college classes, and I lead my classes through this before every quiz or exam. So let me just give you a quick overview. So first is a phrase you say, shift your state. It doesn't have to be this phrase, but it's something that you say every single time that you start the alpha state process, and eventually your brain will start to associate the phrase with the state. And soon, if you do this enough, you can simply say shift your state, and your brain will shift into more alpha brainwave state. Sit up straight. You're basically just getting into a good physical state. Allow a deep breath in. Close your eyes as you exhale quietly. And then as your eyes are closed, you want to picture in your mind's eye your peaceful place. This is basically some place where you feel calm, relaxed, resourceful, at ease, where you feel like your best. It could be, you know, a vacation spot, someplace in nature, could be a church or synagogue, could be your bedroom, your grandparents' place. It doesn't even have to be real, but someplace when you think about it, you really feel relaxed and peaceful and at ease. You want to allow the image to become brighter in your mind's eye. This has to do with NLP, but the more bright we make an image when we're thinking about it, the more realistic it seems to us. Then when your eyes are still closed, you look straight up, look straight down, and then open your eyes and focus. So that's sort of an overview. Let me stop this sharing. So I have to say I'm feeling a little self-conscious leading people through this, even though I do this all the time over the webcam. So what I can do is just lead you through this process and then see how you feel at the end.
Yeah, awesome. And I have one question of clarification. The looking up and the looking down is still with our eyes closed, right? So it's moving our eyes with them closed.
And this has to do with NLP. In essence, what happens is when people tend to access their visual cortex, when they're thinking about a visual image in their mind's eye, your eyes tend to look up. So you can kind of do a little experiment. If you go to somebody and you ask them to describe their room or tell me about the car, watch their eyes, and when they're remembering visual data, they tend to look up. So by looking up, you're basically priming your brain to start taking in visual data, and then looking down, in a sense, you're just getting ready to focus on the book or whatever you're doing.
And I forget if you've said this out loud to us, but this is actually something that you lead with all of your students before they take every test. Is that true?
Before every quiz and before every test. So what I do is, you know, this is completely out of the norm for a college physics classroom. First time I lead it, you know, I kind of go through the brain information and why it's important. I do it for the first 2 or 3 quizzes, and then I poll the students and say, how many of you want me to keep doing this? And every single time it's 90–95+% of the students want to continue doing it. And the great thing is it's not just before the quiz or test, but if you ever feel yourself panicking and your mind goes blank, you can do this process to quickly get into a more resourceful state of mind.
I love it. I panic all the time as an entrepreneur with my own business.
And this is not just like, I'm a big rock climber. Before I do any kind of climb, I do this. Anytime I really feel like I just need to focus, and it doesn't have to be school, it could be anything, this is a great way of just like focusing your mind's power on one thing and one thing only.
Wonderful.
All right, so you ready?
I'm ready. And you can imagine, if you need to imagine, you're just leading me through it. I'm going to take my glasses off so everyone can see my closed eyes here.
Okay, do you have a peaceful place in mind that you can imagine?
Yes.
Okay. So if you're watching, just follow along, and yeah, we'll see how you feel at the end. So shift your state, sit up straight, allow a deep breath in, close your eyes as you exhale quietly, and take a moment and picture in your mind's eye your peaceful place. This is some place where you feel calm, relaxed, resourceful, confident, and at ease. Continue to allow deep breaths. Allow that image in your mind's eye to become brighter. And with your eyes still closed, look straight up, look down, open your eyes, and focus. And it's pretty interesting to do this in a classroom of like 50 people, because you can really feel the energy of the classroom change. And I've done this with workshops with, like, 170 students, and I first had them, like, shake out so they can feel the energy right before they do it. And then, with 170 people doing it, literally, it's this cool feeling where you can feel the whole energy in the room changes a bit. And it's just more present, more focused, more just, you're there. And so it's a great thing to do before quizzes, before exams, even before studying. Or if you ever find yourself panicking, do this. And you don't even have to do the whole process. Literally just sitting up straight, taking a deep breath like that can change your state.
Well, and I love the piece about seeing it brighter. I actually forgot to do that this time because I was thinking about, I had an idea. Stay focused.
You're multitasking.
I was. But I think that's an important point because this is the first time I've ever done this. And your point is that you need to do it over and over again. I can imagine if I'm scared to take a test, the first time I do this, I'm not going to focus very well on this exercise. I'm just not, because my anxiety is still really high. But that's one of the reasons that we're giving ourselves the cue, right? That's why we're saying change your state, or whatever it is we're going to say to ourselves, so that over time we build a neural pathway for going into this, and it won't feel as bumpy the more we do it.
Right. It's called anchoring. It's just like Pavlov's dog. Pavlov rang a bell, fed the dog, rang a bell, fed the dog, rang a bell, fed the dog. Eventually the dog associated ringing the bell with eating, and Pavlov could just ring the bell and the dog would start to salivate. Well, if every time you do this process you say shift your state, eventually, after you do it a bunch of times, you can just say, shift your state, and your brain automatically starts to get into a more alpha-like brainwave state.
Cool. Well, and I mean, you could even say something like, ready to rock, or, what, it doesn't really matter what you say, right?
Yeah, and thanks for saying that. It doesn't have to be shift your state. It could be anything you want. And I recommend, personalize it, and you don't have to say it out loud. It could be something that you just say internally right before you do it every single time.
Awesome. Yay! Well,
can I mention one more thing about anxiety, test-taking anxiety? So there was a study done by University of Chicago where they took students that were feeling anxious before an exam in a control group, and they basically just had them journal for about 5 to 10 minutes, writing out their anxieties on a piece of paper, and literally that had, I don't want to say miraculous results, but just getting it down, getting it out of your head so you're not obsessing on it, writing it on a piece of paper can do wonders. So if you're feeling anxious about an upcoming exam or quiz, 5 to 10 minutes before it, just write out what you're feeling, and just that process of writing it out and getting it out can have tremendous benefits.
Well, and in the case of people like Kelly, who's on the call, who is doing online learning, what's great about the online thing is that you really can control your entire environment, right, and your pacing in a way that people who are in a classroom can't necessarily do. So the other thing I wanted to touch on before we move to our next question is for our younger students who are in classrooms where actually 10 minutes before your test, you are rushing in between classes if you're in high school, and if you're in middle school, I mean, you could probably even there you're rushing between classes too. So what are some tips and tricks for people who actually don't have time to do this before a test?
That's a good question. The best tip is do the best you can. So, if you're feeling anxious the night before, you can write it out the night before. Ideally, if you can if you're taking a quiz or exam, I recommend as much as possible get there as soon as you can. Make sure you've got everything you have set up. Make sure you've got your pens, your paper, your calculator, whatever. And even if it's just 30 seconds, I'm really scared about the upcoming test. You're just writing something to get it out of your brain. Even if it's just 30 seconds or a minute, it's better than nothing at all.
And this little exercise, even if you don't have time before the teacher passes out the test, you can still, as soon as the test's there, the great thing is you then have a half hour to 45 minutes where it's just you, and this is a totally quiet exercise, so you can close your eyes and take a moment to do it even before you turn the test over, I imagine.
Right, and once you get good at it, literally it takes 30 seconds or a minute. And I love it as a teacher when I give an exam and 45 minutes into it, I see a student sit up, close their eyes, take a deep breath. I'm like, yes. Not yes, they're panicking, but yes, they're doing something to get themselves into a more resourceful state.
Yes, awesome. Well, so in the context, oh wait, let me let people see me. There we go. In the context of knowing that we have a variety of learners here, and I just love the intergenerational nature of these talks. That Peg told us that she's 71, so we have middle schoolers and we have a 71-year-old lifelong learner here, and people in the middle. So let's talk about memory techniques and what some simple memory techniques are that any of these folks can learn.
Okay, so I want to just give you sort of 3 or 4 techniques / strategies.
Great.
Again, I want to do a little quick screen share. Let's try this out real quick. Okay, can you see this memory exercise?
Yes.
So this is something I've done at almost every workshop I've given. I do this with my students where basically here's a list of 20 words, give them maybe 30 seconds or a minute to memorize as many as they can, and then I blank the screen and have them write it down. Inevitably, there's 3 words that are always the best remembered out of all of them. Those words are grass, pen, and table. And the reason they're remembered has to do with some of the techniques. So the reason grass and pen are among the best remembered has to do with the order in which something is learned. It's called, it's called the primacy-recency effect or the serial position effect. So this is a graph of basically the words that are recalled as a function of position and sequence. So these are the words at the beginning, words in the middle, words at the end. So people tend to remember the most at the beginning and the end of a list, but this doesn't only apply to lists, this applies to any learning situation. So you tend to remember the most at the beginning and the end of any class. What that means is that, when you're studying, do I have this? Oh, I must have gotten rid of it. When you're studying, if you break your study session up into, chunks of 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, you're going to have more beginnings and endings. The reason why table is well remembered should be obvious. It's just because it stands out from all the rest. So whatever you do, if you have information that you want to remember, you want to make it easily seen. You want it to stand out. So here's an example. Here's some notes I have from a talk that I gave. Very boring, just black and white. And then I added a bunch of color and images and things like that. The image here is going to be so much more memorable than this. So one of the mistakes I see people make when they're taking notes is that they take notes in one color, just in pen or pencil. There's no color, there's no images, there's no nothing. Imagine trying to study this over here as compared to trying to study this over here.
Yeah, and I want to jump in here because for those of you...
Did you want me to go back to that?
Yeah, I want to see the screen share. Because I just have to say that I'm so excited to hear everything you have to say, because basically it's everything I'm teaching in the anti-boring approach to powerful studying. Sorry, I could be showing myself.
Here we go.
It's everything in the anti-boring approach to powerful studying. But I haven't really done a lot of, I did get my master's in education, but weirdly, during your master's in education, you don't really learn about how people learn.
Right.
And so I just love that I am teaching the sorts of things that people are, or that, people who have researched have said this is how you should do it.
Right.
And I want to show everyone this, because those of you who either have or will be doing the anti-boring approach in our last week, I talk about get it down notes, and then I talk about hone it till you own it notes. And that's exactly what you have here. Like sometimes when you're taking notes, especially my clients with learning disabilities just cannot do a lot of creative thinking because that takes actually too much of the sense of multitasking. So you do have to take boring notes and just get it down. But then you can take 10 to 15 minutes afterwards and hone it till you've really owned the information. And I love this here because we now see what pages things were on. We see that there are, a certain number of steps, and we have the images. So anyway, love it.
For me, and I have my own color-coded scheme. So this is from a talk. So like PP, this is PowerPoint. So whenever I'm doing a PowerPoint slide I want to show, this is the slide number. Anytime I'm referring to a handout, I have that in blue. The music I'm going to play, I always have in green. Anytime I'm going to ask a question, I have it in red. So I have a color coding scheme that I've been using for a couple of years. And so now I can just look at this and I know, okay, handout page 12, I'm going to be showing PowerPoint slides 39, 40, blah, blah, blah. I know this is the music I'm going to play. This means I want them to take a break. You know, there's just all sorts of little things that you develop over. Oh, am I still sharing the screen?
You are. There's a double Gretchen now.
There is a good. How do oh?
Oh, wow!
I can't see. Wait, where's my screen share? I want to stop sharing.
You're back.
Me now?
Yes, you're back.
Okay.
That was fun.
So anyway, so some memory principles.
Mm-hmm.
So principle number 1, you want to take frequent breaks. Rather than studying for 2 straight hours, I recommend, studying for maybe half hour, 45 minutes at a time, and then taking a 5-minute break. And that 5-minute break should be a complete break. I recommend getting up, stretching, taking a sip of water, having a light snack, just a complete brain break from what you were doing. Don't take a break from English to work on math. That is not a break.
Or Facebook, although that sort of counts, doesn't it? But you're still doing the same thing.
It depends. Like for some people, that's a very social outlet where they can literally let their brain take a break from what they were studying. So I don't think, Facebook is a bad break. So I even recommend, if you're going to take a 5-10 minute break, maybe that's when you check your email or do Facebook. One of the problems is, though, it's rare that you spend 5 minutes on Facebook. So if you can be dedicated and determined enough, be like, all right, I'm doing a 5-minute break, I'm going to check a few posts, that's fine. The problem is that often turns into a half hour, 45 minutes, an hour plus, and so that's the danger with that.
And you're still sitting when you're on Facebook, probably.
That's true.
So
yeah, I would, and I know you're a big fan of this, move the body.
Yeah.
So take a break, stand up, take a walk around the block, anything to just give your brain a little break. Another one, 2, make important information stand out. Like you were saying, it doesn't have to be if you're taking class notes during class. A lot of times there is not time to listen to the teacher, take notes, add color, things like that. So one of the things I recommend is as soon as after class as possible, take 10 or 15 minutes and add color, add images, make your notes beautiful. Because visual memory is our strongest memory. We tend to notice things that stand out. It shifts our focus. So make the important information stand out. Another one, 2, association. If you can associate new information with old information, you're going to be that much more likely to remember it. So there's something in the brain called meaning networks. As an example, if I ask people to think about things that are yellow, you might think of bananas and the sun and school buses. Well, if I could peer inside your brain, I would see that the specific neurons that are holding the memory of sun are physically connected to the neurons that are holding the memory of school bus, that are holding the memory of banana. So when you think of yellow, all those parts of the brain are lighting up. So as a teacher, if I can tie my information to what they already know, if I can associate new with old, they're going to be much more likely to remember it. So, as an example, whenever I'm teaching conservation of energy, Santa Cruz, a lot of people are into skateboarding. So I try and come up with a lot of skateboarding examples so that when they're skateboarding, now they're thinking conservation of energy. So I'm tying my information to what they already know. And then just one more to go through is just frequent review of the material. It's almost impossible to cram and learn information long term. You can cram and have that information in your short-term memory, but it's not going to be there long term. If you really want to remember something, you want to review it multiple times over the course of multiple days. So, 10 minutes, 2 days later, another 10 minutes, 3 days later, another 10 minutes is much better than studying for a half hour at one time. So lots of little review sessions.
Well, and I want to name that. I think often students are told this by teachers, but it's sort of in one ear and out the other. It's like, yeah, whatever, I know that's good. But seriously, it's good. And where the anti-boring approach to powerful studying comes in is so find interesting ways to do that review. Whether it's like I encourage kids to either have a huge whiteboard in their room or to keep a blank wall so that they can put up posters or put up pictures or cards, or I had a college student who was doing environmental science with blue tape create a whole taxonomy on his wall that was huge. It spanned his college dorm room, and he put up index cards in different places on the taxonomy, and then it's there all the time. So there can be some fun and interesting ways, and not just boring ways, of reviewing that information during your small chunks.
Definitely. And as a teacher, I start every single class with a 5-minute recap of what we did the day before. And that serves a couple purposes. One, the beginning and end of any class is golden time. It's when we tend to have the most recall. And so for me, always the beginning of class is a 5 or 10-minute review of what we did last class. And again, I'm refiring the neural connections, and so by the time they take a test, my students have been exposed to the material 7, 8, 9 times through different reviews, through homework, through labs, through quizzes, through just multiple reviews, so that they just, you hammer it.
Well, and I want to challenge you and I, and we're going to get to Kelly's question in just a second because I want to make sure we get to that before 5 p.m. But, oh yes, challenge. I want to challenge you and I in our continued collaboration over time to find some ways to use the webinar format in a way that follows all your principles, because you and I are not doing that right now. And it's,
wait, we're doing this kind of stuff.
Yes, we're being engaging, but we didn't stop. Like, it occurred to me, like, I want to figure out on the Google Plus Hangout how to get some music here so that we act, and a fun picture, so we could actually take a music break where people get to journal even for 3 minutes without us just gabbing.
Right.
So anyway, just want to name that, and really encourage those of you who are watching to use video that way, because you can stop things at the 15 to 20 minute increment. But I'm excited to collaborate with you.
I would love that.
On that, Joe. Okay, so here's what Kelly asked via email earlier today. She said, I need to learn some specific skills for my current job, and online courses seem to be a good fit, but I find it difficult to stay focused while I am using them. There are distractions, to be sure, but I am also more used to learning by reading physical textbooks, being able to navigate back and forth, etc. So the reviewing the content online just is not sticking for her. And she feels like she probably has to transfer the content offline in order to learn it, but I think that seems like a lot of work and extra futzy. So she wanted to know if there were study strategies that are different for online resources versus physical resources. So what do you think about that?
I think you're right in that I would transfer the information offline. So I do a lot of web research. If there's something that I really feel like I want to remember, I print it out and I highlight it and I make notes on it. And even so, if I'm watching a video, I'm watching a video with pen in hand. And so it's hard to just watch a video for an hour and then retain all the information because it's very passive. One of the keys to learning is just active learning, right? There's no such thing as passive learning. It's almost impossible to sit back and listen to a lecture for 90 minutes without taking notes and remember it. People realize that, but then when you're learning something online, a lot of times that doesn't transfer. So they think, well, watching a video for 90 minutes online and not taking notes and not doing anything is learning. And the truth is, you're not going to remember most of what you watch unless you're making some sort of physical active involvement. So I would, one, recommend, if you're learning online, first thing, close everything that's not what you're learning. Don't have email open, don't have Facebook open. I would even recommend possibly not even listening to music. Just focus on what you're learning. And if it's a video, I would be watching a video with pen in hand, paper in hand. Like you were saying, I'd be pausing it, taking notes, going back, re-listening to important sections, and then just making an effort to make sure that I have all of the important information somewhere where I can read it again on my own. But yeah, I think you're right. I think it's hard to learn online passively, so I would print out the material that you really want to remember. I would always have pen and paper handy and take lots and lots of notes. Great.
And I would add to that Peg just commented that she used, even today during our talk, used TurboScan to take pictures of your charts. and she's going to
Oh,
review
nice.
computers. So that's cool. And if you're lucky enough at work, Kelly, to have a couple of screens or maybe one big screen, and you're just really feeling like printing isn't going to work for you, which, and by the way, I do tell so many of my college students have on digital reading they have to do, and I always tell them if they can print it out, like go to the school computer lab and print that stuff out. But if you can't do that, you could have two side-by-side screens open, like maybe one is a Microsoft Word document, or what's the name? I'm so blanking right now. There's such a good web app and iPhone app for note-taking, and I just can't think.
Dropbox? Evernote?
Evernote, that's what I'm thinking of. And you can even do things like take screenshots of just the little section. If you can't cut and paste, you could take a screenshot and then drop it into Evernote. And then underneath that, and this is the important thing, summarize in your own words what it's saying. Or just do that anyway, like summarize every 15 minutes in your side document, summarize what it's saying. And studies prove that notes taken by typing just go into different parts of the brain and are not as accurate, or not as don't go into your long-term memory as well as handwritten notes. But if you feel like you have to stay online, that's what I would do, is be really interactive with another app, but make sure that you have them side by side so that you're not having to flip screens and tabs all the time, because I think that's confusing for the brain.
Another great thing about Evernote is just that you can access it anywhere. There's an Evernote app for the Android, for iPad, for iPhone, and the great thing is I talk about this a little bit in the book, things called spare minutes. So there's so much time during the day where we're waiting in line, waiting for the next class, driving in the car. You can start to use those minutes to your advantage by, pulling up your Evernote app and then quickly reviewing some of the material that you just jotted down. That has to go with the frequent review. It's using your time efficiently. It's just not wasting time. Rather than using time in line to check email or something like that, pull up Evernote, do a quick little 5-minute scan of what you just learned. You're refiring neural networks. You're using your time as efficiently as possible.
And I would add to that. I love this. Building something here, building a sculpture. So you're standing in line and you've got your Evernote app and you're reviewing this thing from the document that you read earlier today, and you realize that maybe a package of chocolate or something that's next to you would be a great metaphor for the thing you were learning. And so you quick in Evernote snap a picture right there, and it just goes straight into, because you can take pictures from the Evernote app, you can make that connection right there. So the next time you go back and look at it, you'll have connected it to this visual image that's also a crazy, weird metaphor, and then you're more likely to have learned it.
Yeah, and Evernote also lets you record audio. So for our auditory learners, it's great to record your own voice reviewing the material. And again, you can listen to that while driving, which is another, most people commute, 20 minutes, a half hour a day. That's a half hour a day where you could actually be reviewing material. And a great way to do that is to hear yourself reviewing it. So you've got a tape recorder, you've got some kind of app, you could even do it in Evernote, record your quick 15-minute summary of what you learned, and then listen to it when you have spare time.
Awesome. Oh, I was just about to say that I was going to keep everyone for 10 more minutes if they wanted to ask you your final 2 questions, but then I remembered I have a client. 1 minute! Darn it!
Wow, we've already been an hour. That was quick.
It was so quick. Whoops, now I'm getting all confused about who to show here. I'm going to show you Continuing Dojo because I'm going to try this thing. Let's see if it works.
Okay.
I think I am sending everybody a link that says Buy Joe's book. I think
this book?
That book, yes. It says add to cart. But actually that add to cart is, I think, just a link to Amazon.com, and the Kindle version is as low as $2.99, I think. So I bought it and I love it, and I'm going to probably be using it as a text in future work that I do. So thank you so much for that, Joe.
You're welcome.
And do you have any other parting words or thoughts that you want to leave people with before we duck out of here?
Yeah, I would just like to say that everybody has so much more potential to learn faster and more efficiently than you can even imagine. And if you really take, so think about this, how much time have you spent in school learning different subjects? If you're in high school, the answer is thousands of hours. Think about how much time you've spent learning how you learn best. And for most people, they can count the number of hours on one hand, if that. You're going to be a student, even if you're not a student now, once you get out there into the work field, you're going to constantly have to upgrade your skills. And so learning how you learn best is one of the best investments you can ever make in yourself. Take the time to figure out your preferred learning styles, the strategies that work best for you, and you can save thousands of hours over the course of your lifetime by learning more efficiently given how you learn best. So invest in yourself, take the time, and really figure out your best learning strategies that work for you.
Awesome. And you can start by getting his book on Amazon.com. I put the link up. And then you can go to GretchenWegner.com if you haven't been to my website and sign up for my mailing list. I'm going to be announcing a program for the fall that I think I'm going to be calling the Anti-Boring Approach to a Kick-Ass Semester.
Ooh.
And we'll be walking you through a lot of this in actually my most affordable package, because I'm moving. People can still do one-to-one coaching if they want to with me, but I'm trying to find some ways that students can have access to all this great material and reminders when they need them through the semester without having to fully invest in what can be kind of expensive with one-to-one coaching. So I'm excited about that. And also, I know that Joe you don't really have an active mailing list yet, do you?
I have, yes and no. I'm just starting one. So if you go to my website, joemccullough.com, on the front page, enter your email address, and I have a quarterly newsletter, a monthly blog, and I'm going to start to produce videos and things like that. So
Great.
Not as active as yours, but getting there.
Great. Well, and we will have stuff together at some point, I certainly hope. So,
I do too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, this is our last guest expert. So have a wonderful rest of your summer. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Gretchen.